Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and today we're going to get you right to the action. We have a very special guest, the longtime ring announcer of WCW, and he's going to talk to us all about his new book, Sitting Ringside Volume 1. So let's get right to it right now. We are so excited to have a very special guest on the show today. He was the longtime ring announcer for WCW and is now the author of Sitting Ringside Volume 1. David Penzer, welcome to Awesome Truth.
Glad to be on Awesome Truth. Thank you guys for having me, man. I'm honored to be here.
It's really exciting to get to talk to you and pick your brain. Your book won't be the first book we read, written by a ring announcer. And I'm curious, just to start us from the top of, like, how did this book kind of come to fruition? I know that you were with Guy Evans, friend of the show, and would love to just hear how you went from start to book.
Before I add that, I just, and it's an interesting story. I just thought of something. Is Michael Capetta the only ring announcer to write a book other than me?
Oh, we read Justin Roberts' book back in the day.
Oh, that's right. I read Justin Roberts' book too.
Yeah, so it was one of the first things we did on this show.
Yeah.
Justin Roberts.
I read it too. I had him on my podcast back in the day. He's a good guy.
He seems like a good guy, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, God, don't you wish Howard Finkel got to write a book?
Oh, man, don't get
wow. Stories in that one would be.
That would be unbelievable. What a shame, huh?
Yeah. So yeah, the third one. That's pretty cool. So yeah, how this came about, had never any intention of writing a book. I mean, even as when I was back on the road with Impact up until the end of last year, when I finished there, people would ask me, fans would say, "Hey, you gonna write a book?" No interest. And I really had no interest in writing a book. So about a year and a half ago, I was cleaning out my desk, and I came upon these file folders, and in there, for some reason, and I have no idea why, I had saved like 200 pages of old formats from WCW, old internal memos. The last Nitro was there, which amazed hasn't gotten out before. We're the first to put it out, and so I saw this treasure trove of rare, never before seen inside material, how the sausage, and so I knew that I had something there, but I didn't know how to get it out there, how to the right venue. It just wasn't my thing. So I took a picture of one of the WCW Saturday Night formats from 1995, and the front page of it, and I put it on Twitter. I'm like, would any of you be interested in this kind of stuff? I just found a bunch of it, and I had no idea how to get it out there, and I had no idea what it was worth. So about 2 hours into this whole thing, Guy Evans, who I had interviewed with a couple of times for the Nitro book, fantastic book, by the way. Probably, I was saying on another podcast, probably the best piece of investigative journalism I've ever seen. Now, granted, I don't read a ton of books, but I have the ones I do read are investigative journalism. I've never seen so many people find so many people that didn't want to be found and get them to talk on the record. I read it, and it was like, you got this guy talk, these are all Turner execs that took wrestling off their resumes 25 years ago.
We always joke too that the death of WCW has been done many, many times before, and Guy got us to care about the death of WCW again. He got us to want to hear that story again. Like, that alone is a Herculean accomplishment. So,
well, he got us the truth,
yeah.
And it's lucky for them we weren't doing well. We still had a top 20 cable television show on Monday night. But they, once Turner had lost 2/3 of the power of the company, we were gone, no matter if we were the number one show on cable television. They didn't want it. And I didn't know that. And I'm glad I didn't know that until like 2 days before. Well, I didn't know that at the time until a guy wrote his book. And then I talked to Eric about it at the first Starcast. I hosted a panel. But if I had known that was going to be the end, like for a month before it happened, I'd have driven myself nuts. I'd drink myself to sleep every night. But yeah, luckily I found out the Saturday before the last Nitro that they canceled the show and that sold to WWF, and so I had Saturday to process it. Then Sunday we flew to Panama City. Then Monday we did it. So it was like too quick. If I'd have known for a week or two, I'd have driven myself nuts. But as I say, I have a tend to drift off in my story, so I apologize.
No,
So
we love it.
guy, called Guy the next day. He said, "Here's my. You still have my number?" I said, "I don't think so." He said, "Here's my number." He DM'd me. He said, "Call me in the morning and stop if you don't mind for now." Until we talk, please stop engaging with all these people. And I said, all right, fair enough. I mean, he had a hugely successful book and was right and wrote Eric's book. And I know Eric very well. He wouldn't let just anybody write his story. So he said, we should do a scrapbook and put all that material in there. And you could tell stories about the different people, different wrestlers, your thoughts on stuff. And I said, that's perfect. That's a perfect way to monetize it. They'll buy it for the rare formats and they'll read my stuff and maybe they'll like it, hopefully. So we started the process. And then about 3 months in, he goes, we're going to change this now. It's not going to be a scrapbook anymore. It's going to be a half bonus content, 200 pages of bonus content. And it's going to be your story, your autobiography. I'm like, I never had any desire to write my autobiography. He goes, and he said, but it's fascinating. I'm telling you. He said, believe me. He said, I do this for a living. Believe me. It's fascinating. It's a unique perspective that you'll never find anywhere else, that for a non-wrestler who was sitting inside literally to watch all that go down in the Monday Night Wars and all that, from my perspective of being a huge wrestling fan who wasn't a wrestler. And he convinced me, and he's pulled it off. I was, I didn't get to see anything really until it was 99.9, about 99% done. We changed a couple things and moved a couple things. There was a couple guys I had buried in telling my stories to him on the that he taped. That I decided when I read it, you know what? There's no need to like put any names out there. Don't want to humiliate anybody. There's really only one person I bury in the entire book, and it's nothing personal, by the way. So yeah, but he would send me like a chapter a day or every 2 days. And like, I'm like jonesing for the next chapter. And I looked at my wife one night after like chapter 4 and I read it and I said, it's my story and I'm jonesing to see the rest of it. So he did a wonderful job and I'm glad he did. People might buy it for the formats and hopefully read the story and like it. Maybe somebody will read the story and buy it for the story and like the formats. But I think it's cool that we were able to put both together. Because I honestly don't think, even as well as Guy tells it, I don't think without the formats, you get as much interest as there is now. Maybe I'm underestimating myself, but I just don't think so.
Well, it sounds great. We're very excited to read. This is a bit of a preview because we haven't read it as well, but you're getting us hyped for it for sure. And David, you touch on this, and I think it's one of the most fascinating things about being a ring announcer. And obviously, you lived that life for a while. It's an underseen, under sort of explored element of pro wrestling. It's a person who's always there, contributing to the show every night, but you don't think about it unless there's an angle involving them or they're replaced or something. Something tumultuous happens with the person. But you're there every night. You're traveling with them. You're interacting with these wrestlers. You're a key part of the show. Like, so you have this, and like you said, you have this innate perch to not only see everything that's happening, but interact with these guys and girls and sort of go on the road with them and live that life. So like you're intimately involved, but you're at a little bit of an arm's length. Like, I think it's the perfect sort of place to observe and to then turn that into a book, because what you see is something no one else ever sees.
Yeah, Guy wrote it. I told the stories. We wrote a whole chapter about the announcers trailer. And if you think and you look back, and I never even thought about it until a lot of this with Guy telling stories was like therapy. Like I would realize like why something happened that I never really thought about, and I would realize that as I'm explaining the Guy, I'm like, I just figured out why this happened. And I wrote about, we had an incredible announcers trailer. We had Dusty Rhodes, Tony Schiavone, Bobby the Brain Heenan, Gene Okerlund, Larry Zbyszko, Mike Tenay. The young me would have like thought if I got to like have a conversation with any of the above people for 5 minutes, it would have been the coolest thing in the world. But every week or twice a week, I got to sit there and listen to them tell stories and rib each other and just be a fly on the wall of like greatness. And so I talk about each one of them individually, and the kind of people they were and what they taught me, and stuff like that. And it's just you don't realize it until you see it in writing. God, that was freaking cool.
It is such a unique perspective, and just obviously the access you get to, I mean, the boys in the back, the talent, the management team, and the production crew, everything. And I was listening to an interview you did recently, and kind of to stem this back to other books with like-minded individual like Justin Roberts. You mentioned something on that interview about how you try to keep a little bit of low profile when it came to like just the people or celebrities. Like I think that you mentioned something about um the guy from Kiss, Gene
Simmons.
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 Thank you. Just kind of just keeping low profile, not being too fanboy for in scenarios like that. And the flip side, when Justin wrote about his experiences, he talked a lot about going up to every celebrity, getting their autograph, and like taking pictures with all of them. And I'm just curious, like, was your approach to that kind of just like where did that stem from? And just like what I guess developed that mindset?
Well, when I talk about my story of getting actually in the business at a time when, in the 1980s and 90s, when they just didn't let you in the back if you weren't a wrestler or a referee. I call it an improbable, impossible journey into the wrestling business, and I was able to get my pinky toe in the door. But the one thing that I learned, and I figured out very early in my getting my pinky toe in the door of a company called Global Wrestling Alliance, is, and I thought about this actively. I said, if you're gonna like act like a mark and ask a bunch of questions about an inside business and ask for autographs and pictures, they're gonna tell you to hit the door. If you are respectful, hang back, just observe, maybe ask if I can get you a cup of coffee. You guys want me to take the garbage out after when the night is over? Is there anything I could do to help promote your next show? And you don't act like a mark. All of a sudden, they don't really notice you as much. And then when they don't notice you, but they see you doing it, then people get curious. Larry Malenko and Bob Roop got curious. They were like, Larry Malenko was the first guy to call me in his office at Global Wrestling Alliance. He said, "What are you doing here? Why are you here?" He goes, "I'm not being rude. I'm just curious. You've been here. You come here every night." And I told him, I said, I grew up loving the wrestling business from the age of 11. And I've got a pinky toe into this business because my dad had a friend who knew the guy who was running the company. And, I just wanted to learn it and immerse myself in it, be respectful of it, and anything I could do to help be a small part of it, whether that's putting up a ring or, running food to get pizza for the talent, whatever it is, I don't mind, because I'm honored to be here. And it's really, I'm living my dream. And when they hear that, all of a sudden, like, they like kind of exhale and put their chair back. And it's like, this guy's really passionate and really respectful and really happy to be here. He's not done anything to show that he, is anything but helpful. And I went about that tactic my whole career. No matter where I went, no matter what opportunities I got, how improbable and impossible they were, I went through that. And it's because of that attitude, I think, that doors opened for me that didn't open for almost anybody else back in the day. I just don't, there was a passion there. And back in the 80s and 90s, the people who were running most of the wrestling companies, who were booking and teaching and all that stuff, they were territory days. So you had to be passionate about this business to be there in the territory days. They drive from Tampa to West Palm Beach on a Monday, and then Tampa to Miami and back on a Wednesday, and then Tampa to Jacksonville and back on a Thursday, Tampa to Fort Lauderdale and back on a Friday. I mean, to do that, you got to be pretty passionate. It's not just for the paycheck. Plus, you're getting your ass kicked. So I think people, and again, this is like therapy for me because I never actively thought about it till I started doing interviews to promote this book. But I think that people respected and appreciated my passion and the fact that I went about myself in a professional, helpful way. And I think if I hadn't, not a doubt in my mind that I wouldn't have made it out of the Global Wrestling Alliance. I probably would have lasted a week. So, I also didn't ask for money. Eventually I found a way to make some, but I never asked for any. So, I was just trying to wait. It's funny. I started this thing, with the Global Wrestling Alliance, and I was trying to find a way to keep it going. And I never knew how long I could keep it going. I never in a million years thought I'd be in WCW, and then I never in a million years thought I'd be the backup ring announcer. Then I never in a million years thought I'd be the main ring announcer during the Monday Night Wars. One of the biggest boom periods in wrestling history. In my mind, it was just keeping it going. So they say keep a low profile, and you asked me about that. Yeah, the best way to keep it going is keep to yourself, keep a low profile, have a tight knit group of people that you trust and that you could have fun with. And other than that, just mind your own business and keep showing up. And if you keep showing up and they don't tell you to go home, then you go day by day, and eventually it becomes week by week and month by month. God bless.
Yep. Wow, that's a crazy story. And like obviously I know wrestling is so much that you hear so many stories built on respect, built on, just someone who shows up night after night, commitment. Like that's just something that people clearly value and take very seriously then and presumably now too. But I would love to talk about, because obviously you have a lot of nostalgia and a lot of great memories. And like you said, talking to guys obviously jarred some of them loose and giving you your own new perspective on your own life choices. How do you compare what you came up through and sort of the older school to what's happening right now? Like, because I know, a lot of people get protective of their own eras and say, in my day we had it this way and people now are soft or different. Like, do you think that's the case, or do you think it's a constantly evolving thing? Like, where do you stand on sort of what you're seeing right now versus where you sort of emerged in wrestling?
Well, I mean, the world has changed in 2020s, and it's going to change again, for good or for bad. Uh, um, Obviously for obvious reasons, a show like All in the Family, even though it was not touting, racial and religious hatred, was making actually the guy who was doing it was getting made fun of at the end of every show and proven wrong. But a show like that couldn't be on anymore, or at least not until maybe recently. I just saw something on TV before I came up to do this interview about the roast of Tom Brady, and I haven't watched it yet. But how maybe cancel culture is subsiding a little bit, and I think that's a good thing. Now, it doesn't mean you could get away with anything, but comedy is comedy, and you laugh at it, and then you go back to your ways. But so again, I went off on a tangent. Sorry, but
It's okay.
I don't even remember what the question was about.
I was gonna
now.
say, no, you said comedy is comedy. It made me think that like wrestling is wrestling. Wrestling
Yeah.
does occupy
Oh,
this weird sphere in the world where
Yeah.
like they do get away with things. They have their own code, their own sort of like
Yeah.
it has its own little
Well,
way of existing sometimes.
I'm not like, protective of, hey, it was better my way than it is now. You get a girl like Samantha Irvin, who probably wouldn't have gotten an opportunity back then, who's found a way to show emotion. I've said this on podcast, who's found a way to show emotion, not like crying at Cody after Cody's last match, finished his story. But I'm talking about in the ring when she's introducing this talent, she shows emotion in a way I don't think I've ever heard before anybody. And I don't think she, because of being a woman and I don't know, I don't think she had any contacts in pro wrestling to have an opportunity to do this. So in some ways, the opportunities are greater, and you don't have to, if you have talent and you do the right thing and you have the right luck, it's not as hard to do as it was for me. So I don't begrudge anybody that. I'm just still thrilled to death that I was able to make my story work.
Now, obviously, ring announcing, what you're best known for. I was reading a few things that I think you were involved with Piper when he was on a book tour. You were involved with kind of booking, like a talent booking agent at certain points. I mean, clearly you were involved in WCW to the point where you had a lot of call sheets and run of shows and just various documents that were a lot of the people who were helping obviously make the show. Just tell us more about just some of the other experiences you had behind the scenes. Any favorite moments from back in those days that stand out that go beyond ring announcing?
Well, as soon as I got my pinky toe in the door at WCW, I knew that I had to keep doing what I was doing, but on steroids. Um, uh, and so anything I could do, hey Jim, Jim Ross would be like, hey, Rock and Roll Express, could you come do promos down the hallway? And so then I'd go up to Jim Ross and say, excuse me, Mr. Ross, if you need anybody to run talent for promos, I hate to see that you have to walk back and forth. I'm happy to do that for you. I would be, Jody Hamilton or the referees or an old timer walking around with a sign-in sheet. And, once they stopped coming, I would offer to do their responsibilities. I would offer to run off because back in the day, they weren't pre-printed. The formats were basically Arn Anderson versus blank, Rock and Roll Express versus blank and blank. They were mostly enhancement matches. And Jody Hamilton would fill in the enhancement talent when during the production meeting, he'd get a list of who was coming, and I was one of the guys bringing them, and then he'd fill it in. So then, I would say, hey, Jody, Mr. Hamilton, do you mind if you want me to run this off? So make copies and hand them out to everybody. Simple stuff. But and I'm not, tooting my own horn. But again, it makes people notice. At first, when I was up there, I only hung around with the enhancement talent that I brought. Everybody else sort of stayed a distance because they couldn't figure out why I was there. Eventually, they started asking me, just like Larry Malenko, what are you doing here? What's your story? And, Junkyard Dog named me the Walking Man because I was walking all over the place all day and all night. And the name still sticks. If I see a Tommy Rich, or when Tracy Smothers was alive, God bless him. Hey, Walking Man, what's up? So yeah, that is, now I don't even remember what your question was. Oh, how do you get in the door? That's how I did it. And to take it to the next set, when I got the job as a backup ring announcer and I was on salary and I had to move to Atlanta, I'm sorry, full-time ring announcer after Capetta left. I went to Tony Schiavone, and who had been instrumental in me getting the backup wrestling gig. And I said, I want to learn production. He said, why? You're the ring announcer. I said, yeah, but what if Eric Bischoff has a brother who's calls and says, hey, my adult son wants to be a ring announcer? I said, I can't rest my laurels on that. So he goes, well, you can't, they're not going to pay you more. And I said, I'm not asking to, I just want to learn how to do it. So I did that. I did talent relations. I would spend a little time on the booking committee. At the very end, I was working with John Laurinaitis at the very end. And to do, we had come up, he and Eric had come up with a metric on how to track like ratings, basically 5 minute by 5 minute to see who people liked and who people didn't like. And, if the company would have been sold to Eric and his Fuse media company, the plan was for John Laurinaitis to be his assistant and for me to be John's assistant and move to Las Vegas where they were going to have the company and all that. So obviously that didn't happen, but yeah, I just tried to learn as many things as I could because, if one job gets taken away, it's good to be valuable to a couple others.
You bet. Absolutely. It's obviously served you very well over the years, David. So I don't want to give it away, obviously, because we want people to buy the book. We want them to get Sitting Ringside after they're done listening to this. But if you want to give a little teaser or a tidbit or or maybe a secondary story, what's something from WCW that, wrestling fans are going to open your book and go, oh my God, I didn't know that. That story's wild, or that's a great little anecdote or tidbit or something like that everyone's going to love.
There's a whole chapter on ribs and stuff like that. First of all, before we go any further, if you want to buy the book, you could either go to Amazon, obviously, or you could go to davidpenzerbook.com, davidpenzerbook.com, all one word. There you have different bundles of stuff that you could get in addition to the book. For example, you could get, for just a little bit of an upcharge, you could get the last Nitro. Obviously, it's in the book if you buy the book, but you could get it as a format printed out. And I like to tell people, and I'm serious about this, one of the things, if I could ever get, to like a WrestleCon or a convention where Flair and Sting are both there, I'd love to have them sign that last page, that last match of Nitro, and put that up on in my office. I mean, that's a piece of history.
Yeah.
So, I joked that I think we might have invented a new form of memorabilia that people are going to want to get signed and stuff. So there's options to do that. But yeah, there's a famous rib about I was riding with Pee Wee Anderson for the longest time, and then Bobby Eaton joined us. And you got to remember, some ribs were like, people would say appropriate. Some ribs were just, the whole reason for doing ribs back then was passing the time. You're driving 4 hours a day, getting to TV, being there all day and night, and then driving to the next town. And there was, the only thing you could listen to at night on the radio was the guy who believed in Martians. I forget his name, Jack something. So, there's no cell phones, there's no internet, there's no nothing. So you pass the time by ribbing. And I'll never forget, because I look back and it's brilliant because they didn't make it so obvious. But little by little, I'm noticing as I'm traveling with Bobby and Pee Wee, I'm noticing that Pee Wee would be driving, Bobby would be sitting in the passenger seat, or vice versa, or I'd be driving, whatever. But not a lot, but just enough for me to notice. Would be reading a wrestling magazine and say, "Hey, he would look at the picture and he'd say, 'What does that say under the picture?'" And Pee Wee would tell him. And then we go to a restaurant. Not every time, but yeah, every time we went to a restaurant, he did this. But Pee Wee would point to the picture on the menu of what he wanted, and Pee Wee would order it for him. And at one point, I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "You didn't know?" He said, "Let me tell him." Bobby said, "Let me tell him. I'm so embarrassed." He said, "I never learned how to read." I was like, "Oh my God, I feel so bad." And the whole thing was a rib. It went on for like 6 months, and then they finally smartened me up. But I mean, nothing innocuous or anything like that. But and it was so well done thinking back to it, because it's so easy to go overboard on stuff like that, especially when you're bored out of your skin, driving so much. But the way they did it was priceless. And Kurt Hennig did some ribs on me. I found a way to get him back in TNA that we'll talk about in Volume 2. But Kurt was a great guy and king of the ribs. But I got off pretty easy on Kurt Hennig's ribs. Now, the rib lasted. It was him and Nick Patrick and a couple other people I haven't found out for sure yet. Maybe Booker T. But I talk about it in length in the book, and it was in every show. Rib. Basically, my briefcase would end up padlocked as when I came back from being out in the ring, to something different every night. Sometimes it was flying in the air in the dressing room with a chain. Sometimes it was padlocked to the shower. I didn't know who was doing it at the time. It came to the point where the ring crew had to bring padlock cutters, and they couldn't get the padlocks off, but they could get whatever was attached to off. So sometimes I'd be walking through the airport like 4 or 5 padlocks on the side of my briefcase handle, which they wouldn't even let you do anymore. But this was before 9/11, so they didn't really ask too many questions or look too hard. But
I appreciate the long-term nature of all of these cons. These cons are really just detailed and lengthy. They're
measured in months, not hours or days.
And there was one I talk about in the book, and that Chris Benoit and I did. And so at the end of the rib, I said, "So Chris, when do we tell him it was a rib?" And he goes, "Never." Not most people wanted you to know it was a rib, but Chris, and I'll have to talk about Chris, unfortunately, because I was very close with him and his family in Volume 2. But that's something I'm not looking forward to doing. But he was kind of off. It was always a little off, And he just said he was like, "This is something I want to enjoy the memories of it. I don't want to ever smart him up." And when Chris Benoit says something like that to you, you don't say "screw you." You say "yes, sir."
Wow. Well, David, those are great stories. And obviously, like you said, Sitting Ringside Volume 1 has loads of them. We'll get Sitting Ringside Volume 2 someday, I hope. But for now, we're all very excited to read the first one. And thank you so much for coming on Awesome Truth. We appreciate it a ton.
Sure, man. My pleasure. Anytime you want to chat about wrestling, I'm happy to do it. And again, davidpenzerbook.com or amazon.com. It's getting great reviews. People seem to really like it. I got some wrestlers reading it and referees that were part of this whole travel experience with me. So I'm looking forward to seeing what their take on it, because they might have seen certain things very differently.
Sure,
So
absolutely.
it should be interesting.
Absolutely. We'll be
Thank
talking
you for
about it
having
again on
me.
this show, but thank you again for coming.
All right, thank you.
You bet. There we go. The great David Penzer. As he said, his book Sitting Ringside Volume 1 is available. DavidPenzerBook.com, Amazon, all sorts of other places. So go give that a buy and a read. And of course, if you want to hear more Awesome Truth, interviews with other wrestling personalities, wrestlers, luminaries of the Squared Circle, you can find our archives at awesometruth.libsyn.com. And you can also subscribe to us for episodes old and new, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts are delivered. Thank you all so much for listening, and remember, the truth will set you free.